And welcome to this special episode of The Dental Guys. I'm Wes, the Dental Guy.
And I'm Jon, the Dental Guy, and it continues to be a fast and furious, crazy time right now, Wes. I mean, man.
This is a special time, Jon, and we're going to be bringing you some special updates. We're kind of trying to refine these things. If you're watching this live, I encourage you to leave questions for our special guest. There's a lot of opportunity right now to seek out good information, and you know that we're all about the research. I mean, the amount of reading that's going on behind the scenes. And, you know, we talk about journals all the time, Jon, but this is the time to refine the information and go to the people that are actually reading the stuff, producing these things. I mean, we are bringing on people, Jon, that are just like spot on.
Right. Because there's a lot of misinformation, and there's a difference between, and we're going to get into this, but there's a difference between misinformation and then things we don't know yet. And I think that what I've really enjoyed about our guests we're going to have on today is they've been real clear from the beginning as we've been talking with them about these are things we do know because we've actually read the primary documents, and then these are the things we don't know. And as we've been getting guidance from all these different outlets, I think what we're seeing, and I made this comment to them earlier, is it's making them look smarter and smarter all the time, because the things that they've been recommending as a result of reading and talking to people that are actually administering this, it's been great. So welcome back to Kris Mahan of Mahan and Associates and Justin Goodbread of Heritage Investors and also financiallysimple.com. Glad to see you guys.
Glad to be here, brother.
Have you aged? How many years have you aged in the last week or two?
At least 10.
Buddy, I crashed yesterday for the first time in many years at about 3 o'clock and made it to my lazy boy, and it was much needed. It's been a wild roller coaster.
Oh yeah. Well, let's get right into it here. I mean, there's a lot. We want to pack a lot of information into a short time here for people that are really, trying to digest as much as they can in a short time as well. I mean, not that we have, dentists have nothing but time, right? But really in the end, we just want to get the best information out there that we can. So let's get right into the same thing that's kind of been a recurring theme over our last couple of weeks. This has been these two main loan programs, economic injury disaster loan, and what we are now calling the PPP or Paycheck Protection Program. So let's talk first about this economic injury disaster loan. I guess I heard one of you call it the EIDL, which that's the first I'd heard. That makes perfect sense. Let's get phonetic here. So what is the status? Because there's been some changes to this program. First off, is anyone getting funded yet? And then what are the changes that have occurred over the last week or two with this?
The underwriting actually went idle, right? They with such demand that SBA had, they had to put a temporary pause on issuing the funds. But the SBA out of Massachusetts on 4/6 on their bulletin issued a new change to idle, which basically put a $1,000 cap per employee. So and it's up to $10,000 of the free granted money, right? That's the free $10,000 they're giving to small business. That's not going to be taxable. That's to help support them for non-payroll related items. But now they're putting a payroll related component on how much you can get of the $10,000 based on employee count, right? So, for example, if you have 6 employees and you apply for the $10,000, they initially stated that you would get the $10,000 and it'll be a grant and be forgiven. Now you would get, if you had 6 employees, you'd get $6,000. If you had 12 employees, you'd still get $10,000 because it's capped at 10. And they're going to start distributions, they said, this week. That means week after next, probably. Right?
Right.
I mean, they are just bombarded right now. But even if you applied for EIDL and you get declined and you had employee counts, you'll get the up to 10,000 even if you got declined. So everybody needs to apply for EIDL who has not done so yet. Justin's been doing it for his clients. I've been doing it for our clients. We've been working collectively together on mutual clients to make sure that they get in there for the EIDL loans, because I think the SBA, whenever they issue their final interpretation last Thursday, where it says, if you've received EIDL funds up until 4/3, you still qualify for PPP. I think you guys saw a lot of blogs and newsletters and emails going, oh no, I can't apply for both, right? again, at least through our podcast and our correspondence, we've always stated that you can definitely apply for both.
So, Kris, I got a question for you, buddy, because you've been tracking this more so than I have. What if somebody has applied for PPP and been approved, but they have yet to apply for EIDL? What are your thoughts on that one?
My understanding is they're mutually different. Again, that's my understanding. I have not run into that where it's actually, this is changing daily, and that's why we get to keep having these fun podcasts, right? But I think they're mutually exclusive for two separate things. They've issued guidance saying that you definitely can have both loans. So I don't know why they would penalize somebody for going PPP first.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't run into that either. It was a question that came up late last night with a client who was approved already for the PPP plan. And I said, well, did you apply for the EIDL loan? They said, no, can I do it now? I was like, I haven't asked that question to anybody. And I know that you're the wizard on this particular section of this rule. So I'm glad to hear that I'm not the only one who hasn't thought about that question yet. So make me feel
right.
smarter every time, brother.
And we still don't know what amounts this EIDL loan will actually allow. I mean, we're talking about how much is a grant, right? How much would be free money, basically, is determined by number of employees. But we still don't know, are they going to only allow that amount of loan, or are they going to allow this based upon your potential damage to your business? Initially we had some discussions about, could you go in and, tap into this loan as a potential way of covering capital expenses. I mean, this is a 30-year loan, pretty good situation. I mean, have you guys heard anything about that? Is that changing? Is this now being more limited to just this small amount, or is there still maybe going to be money available that you can get over and above that?
Yeah, it's my understanding.
To get money above that. Sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
Okay.
Yeah, no, they're still running on the same chassis of the 7B model, guys. The difference, the modification in the bill, the CARES Act that came out, was just applying this $10,000 grant to the same 7B modeling. So the same underwriting metrics is there for the disaster. We can't ask for the value of that loan. And it's basically, if you read the rules of it, it's 50% of trailing 12, or there's a calculation now with this particular CARES profit. Now, how do you calculate the profit? Who knows anymore with the Wild West that we're dealing with? Even some of the SBA lenders even on the SBA calls that I've been on, they're having troubles calculating that. So to your direct question, yeah, you still get the loan itself, which is up to, not always, but up to a 30-year term, set in the CARES Act at a 3.75% interest rate. So we're talking cheap money at a long duration. But we can't apply for $1 million. It's actually an internal calculation that tells us what that loan value is going to be.
So let me ask you this, Justin: if you're out there and you haven't applied for the EIDL loan yet, otherwise known as 7B, what things should you be doing right now? Should you be applying? Should you be jumping into this pool now? Is this a good time?
Yeah, Kris and I have said the same guidance now for like the last decade. It seems like we've been on this journey for at least the last 3 weeks. We've been saying consistently, go ahead and apply now. Go ahead and apply now for the EIDL loan, especially the dental community because of the circumstances. But Kris and I both have clients who are not in the dental, but in other entrepreneurial doctor positions. And we're telling pretty much everybody to apply for it because of the grant position that's now been clarified as late as last week from Massachusetts. So I think, Kris, unless you have any different opinion, I still think you still go out and apply right now for the 7B, the EIDL loan.
Exactly. There's no cap on how you spend the money, other than you can't spend it on payroll. It's got to be for money outside of what PPP is built for. So I know that a lot of practices have had cash flow impacts, and that can help you subsidize immediately some of that cash flow.
That's a great segue into the next, and really I think the big part of what we want to talk about today, which is this PPP, this huge monster that is we've been trying to figure out and understand over the last few weeks. I want to say, let's start with this, of what has changed in our understanding of this over the last week to 2 weeks. Kind of where are we now? And then let's talk a little bit about some of the recommendations that have been thrown out there, and just kind of how maybe wrong some of those have been. Not from you guys, which is awesome, but what's changed in the last week, 2 weeks, and where are we now in our understanding of how this loan works and the funding and all of that?
Kris, let me talk to the kind of the flow, because I personally have gone through this, folks, and I personally have been funded on the PPP and have several clients. So 2 weeks is an eternity in this world. Okay. 2 weeks ago, we actually had the passage of the bill. Think about that. 2 weeks ago, we had the passage of the bill. And then nerds like me and Kris actually spent time with a highlighter, locked ourselves in our office and read the 800-page plus bill with the highlighter and started giving live updates saying, hey, here's what we're reading, knowing that the SBA candidly still has a few days left to actually roll this thing out and provide the final guidance according to the law. As of last Friday, which would have been, I think, the 3rd from my memory, the certain banks, not all banks, but certain banks were eligible at that point to start taking applications. They were the ones who were able to use the e-trans system before this particular system set up. Some other banks came online on Saturday. Now, they were able to take applications, but they came online on Saturday. And currently, there are many banks at this point that haven't. They've been taking an application, but they haven't been processing them for whatever reason. So last Friday, banks began accepting applications. I had mine in because one of my dearest friends works at my local bank. By the way, side note for small banks, they're rocking it out right now compared to the big and the regional banks, just FYI. But my best friend put this thing through, and we were calculating calculations off a number of different areas. I mean, we were getting guidance at the time that you could calculate 1099 income. You could only use $100,000 of total gross income for practitioners. I mean, it was a lot of different misguided or unclarified information that candidly the SBA was doing the best they could. They have 3,300 employees, and last year they did 58,000 loans. Now they're getting ready to do millions of loans. So they were doing the best they can. They were trying to get out in front of this particular position. They told banks yes to go ahead and submit. And what the banks started doing instantly was trying to develop their own underwriting guidelines. And that perhaps was the most frustrating to us. Even the bankers were dealing with their own internal conflicts, saying, look, this loan says there is no personal guarantee and there is no collateral needed. Therefore, there's not a lot of risk to the bank. And so the banks were trying to protect themselves. I think they were still a little gun shy back from 7 and 8. And they approved some things and pushed them through. And other things they began, I wouldn't say nitpicking, but they were trying to figure out, how can we validate this to our traditional CPA, banker, I would say bean counter world, right? Depending on who you were dealing with. And they did the best they could. Well, then at that point, several things got kicked back. I know in my own world, I had to get on the phone and say, no, here's the law. Here's what it says. Here's the essence of the law. Now, they brought us some questions that I saw some legal guidance on. I'm not an attorney. I know we have attorneys that are going to be watching this. But what happens if you calculated your loan incorrectly? Well, the guidance wasn't out yet. And so there may be a hold harmless provision that several attorneys are talking about. So those individuals who use 1099 income, for example, and got paid and funded off of that, and the banks allowed it, there may be some hold harmless. We may have to deal with that on a loan provision toward later on. So we've seen a lot of things change. And here's the most frustrating part for me in the planner world today is that out of the hundreds of clients, and Kris, you probably can say the same thing, and I'll bounce it over to you. Out of the hundreds of clients that we have the opportunity and the pleasure and the honor to serve. I mean, I genuinely mean that. I mean, we're pouring our blood, sweat, and tears in our clients. We would do it in every day of the week. The frustrating thing is that there's no uniformity across the banking world. And the banks are still, despite the SBA guidance that they offered on the 6th, and then Kris, you updated the one this morning on the 8th, the very first question is, you do not have to validate or calculate where the numbers come from. Basically, they're trying to speed the numbers through. So it says here directly from the SBA, no, providing an accurate calculation of payroll costs is a responsibility of the borrower, and the borrower attests to the accuracy of those calculations on the borrower application form. So what the banks were trying to get during this whole time period and the frustration we're dealing with is they were CYA themselves to make sure that if this thing came back around, if the rules changed again, that they were protected. The SBA gave that guidance on the 6th and then reconfirmed that again on the 8th. So that's what I've experienced through this whole thing. Mm-hmm. And Kris, I'll bounce over to you because you have a little bit different take on some of these movements.
No, again, one of the things to speak to is with the hold harmless. I did read where it said if you applied for the loan based on the criteria that the law was at that moment, you would be okay. So if you went out day one and included independent contractors, there's a potential that you'd be okay with that calculation and potential forgiveness, because they said that as this has been so dynamic and fluid in how it's moved, the SBA said they'll honor it as of the time the applications were sent, whatever the law or guidance was at that time. And Justin hit the nail on the head. Is every bank has a different set of criteria that they want for underwriting. When the SBA and Department of Treasury wanted this to be easy, they said based on 941s or based on, or financial statements, or even if you just have bank statements that you can back this up with. And the banks it was a zero risk rate from day one, 100% federal guarantee, no personal collateral, no personal guarantees, but the banks are still hesitant to jump on it because they're afraid that they might be issuing loans to businesses, and they don't know what the economy is going to do. And if these businesses fold, do those loans stick on their bank's balance sheets? And I get it. The bank's number one responsibility is to their stakeholders, to their account holders, to their employees, to their stockholders. And until they get clarity, which it's been moving so rapidly, most banks aren't even submitting these. There's been 70 billion of the initial 350 billion appropriated for this issued so far. And I would say 1/10 of the applications that have been submitted to banks have probably been submitted to SBA. So there's going to be a windfall probably next week, whenever the deadline goes through for the banking regulation window. When they pass this legislation, they had 15 days to basically adjust really how they want to. And the banks are just nervous about that. So it's not getting to the people that need it fast enough, right?
Hey, Kris, do you think
and the people that need it fast enough? I'm sorry.
Well, Kris, do you think that with what Justin said and what you just said, it seems like that there are some major dental-specific management and accounting firms that are struggling with this, right? Why is that? Why is that happening?
Well, and before you answer that, let me say the big thing that for dental that is really the big sticking point for us is this forgiveness period. And let me preface that answer by saying, a week ago when we talked, there was some stuff that got put out there by a couple of the major big dental specific accounting firms that said they had heard or received information that we would be able to defer disbursement of these PPP funds and basically choose our 8-week period of forgiveness. So we could say, hey, we know we're not going back to work until June, so let's go ahead and get everything to the bank. The bank will hold it, and they'll go ahead and get us our money earmarked, and then we'll get the money dispersed when we're ready for it, when we're going back to work, which would be great for us, because then we wouldn't be sitting here holding this money while we're not working. And this was one of the major, this was Kane Waters came out and said this. At the same time, we had McGill Advisory, another major one, talking about how you need to go get it now. And they're still saying that because they're worried about the money running out. So you got these two, big names that are putting this information out. Now Kane Waters is backtracking, saying, well, turns out maybe that won't work quite like that. And actually maybe you can't get it deferred. So now we're thinking totally differently. What is going on? First off, with why are these recommendations being made without understanding this? And then second off, what is the current understanding of the forgiveness period? Because I think everybody's really hinging everything on that. So talk a little bit about that, guys. Like what's going on
Kris,
out there? Why are we getting this guidance?
Kris, you're a healthcare specific, firm. What the heck, man? I'm glad you're right, but what is going on, right? Because some people are in some bad ways right now.
Yeah, and I think that, I attribute all my knowledge to having good friends like Justin Goodbread, because he does all the research and then I get to look at his cliff notes. But that being said,
that's good. Let's give credit to the team and the coaching, right?
That's right.
This is so good.
But I really think what happened was, fear and anxiety, which drives most bad behavior decisions, right? Everybody saw how much money was going out and how much had been appropriated for this bill. And they thought, if you don't go get your money, you're going to miss out on this deal, right? And just for a note, Senator McConnell is going to bring to the floor for unanimous consent tomorrow for them to pass a standalone emergency funding for an additional $250 billion. They've said that they will not leave one small business at the door on this deal. Now, we all know Congress, and it might not get through tomorrow because they like to they like to get their add-ons on the deal, right? But the money is coming. They are going to support small business through this, and I've been confident that they will because we're in uncharted territory. I mean, everybody's bummed about sitting at home and not going to work, but look at World War II, right? The government's going to stand up and protect the citizenry. It's going to protect the businesses, and and you look at the Dow, and whenever they see that relief and that confidence coming through, the Dow pops back up as though at 23 yesterday, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's anxiety and fear, and then they may have gotten misinformation from some bankers and their interpretation with lenders saying they thought they could defer it, but the SBA's come out with clear guidelines that upon approval, the lender has to disperse. It says the first disbursement. So that's what it says. First disbursement of funds has to be made within 10 days. And then you're on the 8-week clock. You're on the 8-week clock, and that's what you have to spend the money on to get it forgiven. And if you don't, then you just basically took on a loan. And that's where dentistry is in such a pickle right now because we're shut down. And we're likely going to be the last ones that get back in, right? Take this for example, Austria, whose their line plateaued weeks ago. They're starting to release the precautions they put on the citizenry, starting to open up stores next week. Restaurants in Austria aren't going to open up until May 15th. So if we're on the same, and they're saying that we're going to plateau or flatline level off our curve in 30 days, that puts us July 15th for restaurants. And where's dentistry going to come in after that? I mean, are they have enough N95 masks for everybody in the dental office? They have enough, HEPA clean air. So what are they going to do? So if you get the money early, you could set yourself up potentially for putting your staff on payroll, running out of that money. And there may be provisions later that if they go like on unemployment, there may be provisions, again, that discount forgiveness there too. So you basically took out a loan, paid your staff, and then you just have a loan for it.
So let me just take a quick little recap break here on what you said, because there's a lot we're unpacking in this, and it's all good. So first off, you're saying that to be clear on this, that there does not appear to be the ability to defer the funds. The SBA has been pretty clear about that over the last week. And if you have an individual small bank lender who says you can defer the funds, then essentially you better get that in writing from the bank on their letterhead saying that's the case, because it doesn't look like that's coming from SBA. And I specifically talked to my bank early on, and they said, yes, our understanding is you might be able to defer. I didn't apply, but we were talking about it. And now I'm talking to them and they're saying, yeah, we're hearing the same thing. Like we can't defer the disbursement. But there's been a ton of people as a result of that initial misinformation, as you said, that have applied. And the question is, what should you do? Because what I'm hearing you say is you guys have always had the same take here as you've read the documents, that government is committed to this. The money isn't a guarantee, but it's most likely going to be there. That's what you guys have kind of hedged on, which is so far seems to be about the right path. So the approach would be, if you were to have already applied, maybe the information has gone out to the SBA, maybe it hasn't. So let's talk about a strategy for people who are listening to this and they're going, this may be the first time they're hearing that they can't defer that 8 weeks. So what should they do now if they're in that boat where they've already applied? First off, what do they do if they want to? Can they pull that back? Is that possible? And then we'll talk about, if they can't pull that back, what's the strategy for those folks?
So, John, let me speak to this for a second, Kris, because I've went through this personally in the process and already been approved in this area. Let's separate the two and let's define our terms just for clarity purposes. Let's deal with application. whenever we say that we've already applied, we first we apply through the loan application, the 7A document that the PPP is positioned on, and we've given it to our banker. That is what some people term as an application, or you've applied. The key is not whether or not you've given the data to your banker, it's whether or not your banker has submitted it and submitted it to the SBA. That's the terms. Like Kris mentioned earlier, I'm hearing, and he is hearing, there's a lot of bankers who's getting the applications and just sitting on them for right now. So let's just, for this point of the conversation, Kris, I'll bounce it to you after the second part. Let's say they've already been submitted to the SBA. So I'll deal with the first chapter, you deal with the second chapter here. If you have submitted your application to the bank and it has not been provided to the SBA, I'm going to tell you to talk to your team now. There's been a lot of guidance provided in the last week on Tuesday the 6th, and then even as late as yesterday from the SBA on how the calculations are made. Whenever we had some clients who use cash balance plans, one of my favorite tools to use for dentists and for high performer business owners. On Saturday of last week, the banks were not allowing that particular calculation. They were saying, hey, you can only use $100,000 gross. You can't use tax. There's a lot of different things they were not allowing. The SBA came out on Tuesday, I think it was the 6th, and said, no, you can use some calculations, even more benefits than what you originally anticipated. So if you've submitted applications to the bank and the bank has not provided that to the SBA, I'm going to tell you to do a recalculating of your numbers, because there's potential for greater forgivable loan positions than you originally anticipated. Go ahead as you're going through that recalculation and reach out to the planner team or a CPA team, more than likely they're working together, to pull in financial papers as it relates to cash balance plan, profit sharing plan, safe harbor plan. If you're an S corporation that the company's making SEP contributions on an annual basis for you, HSA contributions, supplemental disability incomes. So if you have a group DI plan, if you have a company paid DI plan, if you have group health insurance, there's a lot of different benefits here now that many people forgot to include. And I saw a lot of these things, and we're talking sizable dollars. I have one particular client who has a cash balance plan they fund with about $750,000 a year. Friends, that is almost 100, if I forget the exact math, but it's like 200 grand additional forgiveness loan than what they originally applied for. And they were approved yesterday, and funding will take place tomorrow. So if you've applied, in other words, you fill out an application to give it to your bank and they have not submitted that yet, get it back or tell them to hold it, and let's work with as Jon said, smart people, work with your planners, your accounting firms, and double check the math. So I'm going to bounce it over to Kris or any other questions on that at that point.
Well, and just before I go to Kris on his side too, are you saying as far as the forgiveness period, if you have applied and you now realize you can't defer forgiveness, that's another reason to pull it back, right? Because you're going,
oh, absolutely.
Wait, if I know I'm not going to be back at work for another however long, then, I mean, even if you do all these recalculations, you're still not ready to necessarily submit it until you know potentially when you're going to be heading back to work.
Yeah, and Jon, there's a time and place for everything, right? So we even have to dissect that. We have clients that just were not prepared for this, and they're in literal survival mode at this point. And we're basically saying, no, in your case, submit it now, right? So this is not a carte blanche. Okay. Hey, everybody, don't file right now. There are cases that Kris and I are working on jointly that we are saying, no, you cannot weather this storm without some additional resources. The bank's not going to give you any more money. So let's just treat this as a loan, worst case scenario, on a 2-year, 1% interest rate loan. So there are cases that we are telling clients, add now. The majority, though, of seasoned dentists don't need, and that's the optimal word, they have other resources, 0% interest credit cards, loans, lines of credit, cash in the bank, various other positions. They don't need the money. And if that's the case, as of today, I'm taking the position of a wait and see. I'm taking a position of there will be a timing. Who knows? We saw it looked like a potential of a flattening curve on the virus in New York, as some of the reports yesterday. If that's the case, we could be Lord help us, well, I hope we are, we could be dealing back in business in parts of the country in 2.5, 3 weeks from now, maybe here in East Tennessee as well. Who knows? So I'm saying take a wait and see. I'm saying that you can't take this advice or this guidance that Kris and I are given as a blanket advice across all parties. This is where you have to be in detailed conversation with your particular case, with your particular advisors.
So Kris, if you have applied and you have been approved by the SBA, and again, talking about dental specific, and maybe you thought you could defer, but it turns out you can't, because I think there's a lot of people in this boat right now as a result of some of this advice that had come out. What do you tell somebody that's in that situation right now? If they're about to get money into their bank account and they're not going to be going back to work for 4 to 6 weeks, what's the play at this point in those situations if you can't track back and wait?
Well, two things. And Justin, you've been through the process. I've submitted multiple applications to bankers to submit, but after you got approved by the SBA, did you have to sign a promissory note?
So I close on mine tonight, and the money will be there tonight. I have to sign an affidavit, actually, is what I have to sign with my bank, basically saying that I've calculated, I'm a CFP, I've calculated the numbers myself. I provided them all sorts of information that their numbers and my numbers don't quite align, but I made, according to the guidance that the SBA gave on the 6th, that I made the best calculation I could with the information at that time, and that it was honest and trustworthy. That was in addition to the actual SBA loan app. Now, there's a bank document, a closing document that I have to sign on my particular banks. And then the other thing they're doing, which I think is really smart, I got to figure out how practically to do this, is they're actually opening up a separate account altogether for this particular loan. Right. And saying that we want you to be able to help you track that loan. Well, the practicality, Kris, and maybe this will be another podcast for the future, is how in the world do I just sync that up with my payroll during a particular time? I mean, there's some practicality, some steps in the accounting world that my brain hasn't even started diving into that we can maybe do a podcast later on about.
Yeah. But, again, I asked that question, John, just due to the fact that if you've submitted your application and you haven't been approved, it's my understanding you can pull it back. If you've submitted your application and now wondering, oh man, I didn't know I could include retirement benefits, group health benefits, cafeteria benefits, those types of things, then you can pull it back. I pulled one back today because one of my clients heard other advice and said, I need to run and get the money before it runs out. And they were working with their banker, and they were both working earnestly in good faith together, trying to do what was the right thing. And then I looked at the calculation. I'm like, you're leaving a lot of money on the table of what you can get for your business, for your employees, right? For your viability of your business. And I talked to the banker today, said, hey, I'm gonna pull it back, and we're gonna hold the grid and watch. Now back to your other statement, John, if you have the money, right? If you have the money already in your account, I would recommend at this time not just to go put people back on payroll. I think there's probably going to be some guidance as to how this may have happened. But again, if it's going to be a loan, okay, if it's going to be a loan, it's going to be a liability because we might miss our 8-week window, then at least keep the money for the business operations whenever you come back and going. So don't go out there and go, great, I got it. Now I got to put everybody on payroll until we know when we're going back in the game. Right? Because in my opinion, the PPP was not there to subsidize the unemployment rolls. Okay. And dental is a lot different because we are closed down, right? But I think you see a lot of commentators and posts and blogs and everything going, the PPP is here to get people off unemployment rolls. You can start paying them again while we get through this. No, PPP is there to get these businesses up and going when we start back. Because when a dental office has been shut down for 4, 6, 8 weeks, and you start on day 1 and start generating revenues again, you got payroll due in 2 weeks. How are you going to cover that? Right? It's there to make sure you can bring all your team members back, pay them up 75% to full benefits, and keep them while you go through that transition of going back into operation. Is how I look at it. I think they may very well extend that 630, but if you've already got your money, if you've already got the money wired into your account because we ran and got it, hey, it is what it is. I think there may be some opportunities potentially to hopefully clarify it, but that being said, hold it, put it in that other account that you have, if you do have it. If you don't, put it in the bank and just let it sit there until we know further guidance.
I think that's
and
good
you just
advice.
kind of have to accept that you might not get a lot of forgiveness on this, but at least you have the money and you do have some ability. Yeah, that's right. So
before,
to kind of
John,
recap
we get
that,
into just recap that, John, and then after that we've got a question here, and then we'll hit up with that question, and then we've got one follow-up question for Justin and Kris.
Yeah, so just to recap again, we know that if you have applied, and now that we know we can't defer forgiveness, period, if you have applied and it hasn't actually gone through to the SBA, see if you can pull that back out. That'll allow you to do a more favorable calculation potentially on your forgivable amount, and also allows you to maybe wait until you were closer to opening. If you have gotten the money already, then you might not have as much of a forgiveness situation now because you can't defer, but at least you've got the money. Now the question coming in, what are the list of additional items we should add to our calculations for PPP? And did I hear something special for S corporations? That's a great question. I feel like it's a high weeds kind of question though, right? We got to be careful because that's probably very, very specific to individual business, I guess. But is there a list somewhere that somebody could go and look at that could help to understand that? Or is that really something that you have to go to your accountant or your CFP, or how do you get that information?
I would share this, and I'd be interested to hear Justin's feedback, but everybody that I've seen that have calculated their own, because they tried to make it simple, right? They tried to, and there was different questions if it's going to be 12-month trailing through 3/31 or through 2/29. They've given guidance that it's based on the prior 12 months of 2019 if you were in business. However, you're seasonal or you weren't in business, you can use different time periods to use your payroll. One of the things that I think was a misnomer at first was that you could add to the amount for loan request of the employer FICA and Medicare match, which you can't, but it is gross payroll up to $100,000 per employee. You have to list any affiliate companies that the owners have ownership in and how many employees they have with the application. You have to take that gross payroll number. You have to take retirement benefits, which we do inclusive of owners' contributions to their plans, and that may come back. But guess what? If it comes back and they have a limit on that after the fact, at least you got the money. And again, with this money that the owners have deferred 6 months, anything that you don't have to spend, you can, if it turns into a loan, you can just pay it right back. Right? So again, it's good Tums, it's good Ambien to get it. But we do the pension, the employer pension contributions, which would be profit sharing, safe harbor, defined benefit plans. We take that amount. We take health insurance paid in. You got to pick up your state unemployment and expenses on there, and then you take that calculation and you can really factor in and get a really nice number. But you want to make sure it's bulletproof and you have your backup. So if it ever is questioned in the future, you can show that you gave your earnest good faith best estimate in giving that number true and accurate. We take that amount.
Kris, you hit all the nails on the head. Where it gets complicated, friends, is that if you're talking about S corps, LLC, sole proprietorships, all these various different things here, and even sole props. I mean, I think you can't even submit it. The banks can't even submit a sole prop until tomorrow. I think it is from my time frame that I remember. Right? Do you remember that time frame for submission on sole props?
Giving that number true. I think it's independent contractors and people in the business without
Kris, you hit all the nails on the head. Where it gets complicated,
that's the sole prop that I understood. Only applies on 410. But if you're a sole prop, a single member LLC, a general partnership, an S corp, C corp, I think you're good to go. Because they wanted the purpose why they had the 410 deadline on the sole props and independent contractors.
Do you remember that time frame for?
So they wanted to get the money out to companies that had employees. I think it's independent contractors first.
Well, the reason why I bring that up, Kris, is because there's a lot of dentists who are W-2 employees at one firm, and then they're a float contractor at another, and there are 1099 sole props, right? So I had one yesterday that I'm like, 401k, go ahead and fill it out. Well, in your sole prop, I mean, if you're done with a solo K that you're marrying and combining with the company's 401k, that's a calculation that you have to include. So if you're S Corp, if you're C Corp, no matter what it is, there's various calculations. I bring that up, Kris, for these strange retirement plans that we often utilize to try to remember. Kris, you've said it many times on our podcast that the Internal Revenue Code is one of the greatest wealth creation tools in the country, in the world. And so we're utilizing the IRC to with retirement plans. I actually had a dentist. You'll love this. I had somebody reach out to me that listened to the podcast, listened to the Dental Guys podcast, and he said, "Hey, I want to hire you to run my life. I want to hire Kris to run our lives, but I don't want to deal with any of that retirement Wall Street bullcrap." And I'm like, well, time out, buddy. We can't double your net worth every 3 to 5 years if we can't use the tool. So I go back to friends, whenever you're calculating these numbers, Kris hit all the numbers on the head, but this is where I'm going to tell you to talk to your planners and your advisors, your CPA, your planning team, even if you have an attorney. Some states use attorneys in these type of talk to them and let them double check your math. It doesn't hurt. Guess what? I let my CPA double check my math before I send it in. And then once you pull all that information, here's my caution to you. Be prepared for your bank to ask you for things that are not required. Just go ahead and be prepared. They may ask you for this form or that form or this report or that report, and it's not required according to the rule. But again, they're going to require it based on their own. So do your best, and then when you start with the bank, and just get them what they need. And then once you're having problems calculating, get your rock stars on the phone with the bank, and let them show them, the bank, how they can help calculate your numbers to where they need.
Well, and this is great. I mean, basically what I take from this, two things I take from this is, number one, we can get a lot more than just $100,000 salary built into this. There's a lot more here that you leave on the table if you don't start really digging into retirement contributions, pension, unemployment. There's a lot that we listed. And number two, make sure you talk to people that know what they're doing, because you could potentially see a lot of benefit from that. What's the strategy? We talked about if you've already applied, what to do. If you haven't applied yet, you haven't been kind of following along what you guys have been advocating, which is to hold off till we have more guidance, till we know where we need to go, pension, unemployment. There's a lot of questions listed. And number two, make sure you apply. What do I do now? What will be your guidance today on April the 9th, right? So it could change for people to do that have not applied for the PPP yet. Justin, we'll start with you, and then we'll go over to Kris for his advice as well.
Yeah, I think you have to answer that on a state specific, on a position specific. You can't answer that one, in my opinion, today on April the 9th from a macro level. So there are parts of our country which I know dentists have not lost stride. They're in rural America, and they are just rocking and rolling right now. So in that particular case, if you have some damage, you may go ahead and apply at this point, depending on where your particular state location is. I think, though, for the masses, what I would say as just some guidance is go ahead, as that list that Kris just so beautifully articulated out there, go ahead and start working with your advisors to get that information, get it together, and go ahead and prepare the loan document. Be prepared, right? And then as you yourself, or as your advisors, or as additional guidance is unveiled here in the next week, day, who knows, weekend, at that point, you may apply sooner than later, or you may delay. I think we can get prepared at this point, and then trust your team. And ultimately, I was talking with an individual yesterday, and he said, Justin, my gut tells me, and we always have that gut feeling sometimes, right? Listen to your gut, take the advice, and then listen to your gut. At the end of the day, your decision is in your camp. You're the business owner. There is an old saying that says, in the multitude of counselors, there is safety, who Solomon wrote that actual proverb out. And so you want to get the counsel of your advisors, but then at the end of the day, make the best decision. Donald Trump, I'm not trying to posture him in any way. I have mixed emotions about the man many times, but he made this statement in one of his interviews years ago. He said, I'd like to collect as much information as I can, get prepared, and delay my decision as long as possible. I think that is the most prudent advice that I can give at this point. Now, Kris, I bounce it to you to help answer that same question.
No, I echo that completely. We're in an unknown, right? And when you're dealing with the unknown, you don't want to run through the door, right? You want to look around. You want to walk through. You want to be very observant to see, make sure that any of our steps that we make today don't hinder us moving forward, right? So I would echo and say, yes, get everything teed up, get it to your banker, make sure it's cool with their underwriting department, but hold the application. And then you hold it, just like Justin said, two things: when you need it, and if you don't need it while you're closed down, you want to get these funds as close to the day you reopen, so these monies can be there to support your small businesses and your practices to come in and not limp along and have to, holes are hard to dig out of. They're easy to dig and they're hard to get out of. And this is there for these small businesses to start business day one, whether it's May 4th, June 5th, or July 6th, right? Whatever the date is that we get back in the game, this is there. And I would recommend everybody utilize these funds strategically to make sure that you and your team can hit the ground running, where you don't have to worry about, any, supplies. You don't have to worry about cash flow or capital. You don't have to worry about, cutting employees' pay or cutting employees, or cutting your employee count later. It's going to give you a good 2-month run to get back and going, getting that stability for your practice and your employees and their jobs.
Gotcha. And I think that's a good way to sort of sum things up, that first off, take your time, don't rush through this, and think about the potential upside of, if you hit this right, what this can do for your business, to get first off closer to the time we're going to reopen, so that you can not only have the money potentially forgiven, but also the more we're going along with this, while there are changes being made, you don't want to get caught using the money for something that turns out down the road wasn't exactly what it needed to be used for. We were talking about this before the show, that even people saying, oh, well, if I get the money now, I'll go ahead and prepay closer to the payroll costs, or give people bonuses or something like that, so that I can get the forgiveness. But, is that going to be something that ends up getting disallowed, as we go forward, because it wasn't exactly the idea behind it? And I think there's so many things right now that we don't know. And I think that this is good advice to kind of take home and say, all right, talk with your advisors, keep your head in the game, get everything ready, but see if we can time everything right to hit it at the time when we're on the upswing, when you're going to need the most help that you probably ever needed to pay your payroll costs, especially because there's a real potential here. We may be working, at least initially, harder than we ever have to try to get these patients in right at the time that they've been backlogged for a couple months.
Yeah, so let me just say a little bit about that, is that it is unbelievable the amount of backlog that you're going to have. And we're gonna try to tackle that on a different show. But John, I might go ahead and say what I sent you and Kris yesterday was, we added up how many restorative hours. Now, we're not talking about money. We're just talking about how much restorative hours on my schedule alone that's been moved through our deadline, which is the end of April. So if we've moved every patient to May 4th, we calculated just on my schedule 180 hours scheduled. 180. That is a month. If you work a 40-hour week, well, the average dentist works 32 hours a week, right? So 32 into 180. What is that math, Justin? You're the math whiz here.
I don't know.
5 or 6 weeks. 5 or 6 weeks worth of work.
That's 5 or 6 weeks of work. Yeah, exactly. So, here's the thing is, how are you even going to do that, right? And so we want to talk a little bit about that on a future show, about how to manage that schedule. We have some interesting ideas and some scheduling experts and that type of thing. I also want to say this.
One thing you're going to need is money. You're going to need money.
In
order to, there's one thing it's going to be, you're going to need more money for payroll than you probably ever have. And
get ready to pay
that's
overtime.
Why this is tough. Yeah. That's why this is so
important
to get the max you
can. For a shameless plug here, guys, I want to just tell you this, that we've already shifted the podcast. Yeah, shameless, the shameless plug. We've already shifted the Financially Simple podcast. Tomorrow, we're recording our very first episode. How do you turn around, right? So I don't, some of these practices, I don't like the term startup, right? But that's in effect what it is. But it's technically a turnaround. you've gone through and now you got to get it up fast. So there's actually an industry called turnaround agents that do this. And we're padding the podcast with those individuals who do this for a living. Turnaround podcast. So that's a shameless plug. I'm sorry. I had to do that. You know, you're going on our channel as well here streaming this. So I wanted to shout out to our peeps as well.
Yeah, a lot of questions are coming in even now. And I think, you know, here's the thing is we'll have Justin and Kris jump on there. A lot of these questions that have came in just here at the last few minutes have been really good, and we've answered those, I think, throughout the show. So if you go back and rewatch the live stream, I appreciate those that have commented about the audio. We had a little issue with some feedback through Facebook responses and things, and so I really appreciate that. That was corrected within a couple minutes, and if it wasn't for you guys, we wouldn't know those things. We're going to release this, Jon, in a audio format coming up here very soon. Try to push that out by tomorrow. And so if not, if you don't see it there, you can just rewatch it on Facebook or even go up on the YouTube channel.
And one thing I would just say in kind of closing here, you know, we've had a theme over this last week in our podcast, which keeps coming up, which is the scarcity mindset versus the abundance mindset. And, you know, I hear it's really affecting dentists right now in every possible way. It's affecting our mental health. It's affecting our approach to these loan programs. It's affecting our approach to coming back into our practice. And it's really a damaging thing. And I think that if we can shift our mindset from scarcity to abundance and think about what's possible instead of things are going to run out, we're not going to have enough of this, we're never going to get back to where we were, we're not going to have enough, you know, and start to think about, okay, well, what if it turns out that actually the money is there? And what if it turns out that, you know, I mean, obviously plan for the worst, right? Definitely. But also try to think about what is possible. Because, man, everything we're hearing is just preying on this idea of scarcity. And I think if we can just kind of back up from that, man, I know my mental health has improved the more I've heard from smart people who have kind of told me, you know what, like, it's going to be okay. Take it easy. Think more about what's possible. I think that's something we could definitely take home and make us sleep a little bit better.
Yeah, as we close out the show, Kris, tell the listeners where you can be found and how they can reach out to you.
Now, sure, they can go to our website, which is Mahan, MAHAN, associates.com, or they can email me directly at Kris@mahanassociates.com. We're all one big community here, you know, and we're all learning from each other. So if there's ever any questions, feel free to email me at any time, because we're just one big mastermind group trying to figure out the best way to do this to make sure that practices are not only successful or turnaround, but they can come out of this likely better than they did coming into it. If you really think strategically with quadrant 2 thinking and with all the things that you want to do to your practice and have subsidized funding from the federal government on multiple levels, and there's levels out there that we haven't even talked about, past EIDL loans or PPP loans that we'll talk about after we get through some of this heartburn, that it's going to be that the government's already allocated a mass amount of funds to help small business. This may be the time to explode. And I echo Jon's comments that with that abundance mentality, I think that you can set your practice and your patients and your staff up for a better practice than there was before we went into this.
Awesome. Justin, where can the listeners find out about you?
So yeah, check out financiallysimple.com. That's the core of our hub. We have the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, anywhere out that you want to look to, Financially Simple. So I would say go there, or you can find me on my public page, Justin Goodbread. It's a public profile, so you just go in there and follow it. We're trying to do our best. Kris has been on the show several times as well. We're trying to get all this information out. We've had a lot of smart people come into the channel and try to give some very good guidance, some abundance mentality. I'm the same belief, Jon, that it's now abundance mentality more than ever. You know, like I've said here recently on my show consistently, friends, is this, and I want to leave you this last little bit of hope, that the sun will come up tomorrow, barring the Lord's return. The sun will come up tomorrow just like it did today. But if you look at the goodness that we all have, I've heard more than once this last week, I've heard people say, I played kickball with my kids. The world of sports is not there anymore. I watched the leaves bud on every tree around my house. I've never done that before. I was able to have dinner with my family for the last 3 to 4 weeks. So we have in this moment of pause, I call it a Selah moment. If you've ever read any of scripture, use a Selah, take a moment and just breathe and decompress. And now in the dental community more than ever, breathe. Because as soon as this thing kicks up in gear, you're going to be hustling. You're going to be a hamster on a wheel. It's going to get at it. So make some memories right now. The sun will come up tomorrow. There is more goodness than badness around us. Sun will come up tomorrow, and this too shall pass. So y'all keep your head up.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. That's a great way to finish it out. I mean, I don't think it could get any better than that thought process.
Yeah,
Wes.
this is wonderful. I really appreciate these two guys coming on, and I appreciate all the people that joined the live stream today, and the feedback there has been fantastic. We've got a lot of stuff coming out for you guys, right? And if you haven't checked out our Facebook page, you need to check that out. We're also streaming live on YouTube as well, and we're releasing this content as it comes available to us, to you. We're going to try to do this financial update, Jon, I think on a more consistent basis, but as time goes on, you're going to want more information, and we'll try to kind of digest it behind the scenes, bring Kris and Justin back on. So I know you all appreciate that. Tomorrow, Jon, tell us a little bit about a special guest, some clinical stuff that you guys are going to love. Jon?
Yeah, this is obviously the financial side of it is what's stressing us all out, but it gives us an opportunity as we talk about breathing, taking a moment to bring people on that are going to help contribute to our education during this time. So as we've continued to partner with Spirit Education, we're going to have Rebecca Bacow on the show. And we've talked to Becca before. She's a very, very high level orthodontist who talks a lot about airway, skeletal growth, some of the newest techniques of being able to influence that and how that plays a role on our overall restorative treatment. And she's going to be on with us tomorrow to talk about some interesting things and developments, talking a little bit about the surgical connection with airway, talking about airway development in kids, and just kind of giving us some next level information. So I think you guys are going to love this. She is at the top of her game, and we're really excited to have her on tomorrow. So join us for the live stream that we'll be doing tomorrow right around noon Eastern. It's been a great show once again. Thanks for everybody that participated today. Thanks to Kris and Justin. We'll be back with you tomorrow. So for Wes, I'm Jon. We are the Dental Guys.